let us see the internal respiration. In internal respiration, suppose this is the alveoli and here this is the tissue. Alveoli and tissue. We have seen external respiration, that is exchange of gases from lungs to blood in blood capillary. When the oxygen enters into the blood capillary, what happens? Here this is the alveoli. In the alveoli, the wall of alveoli, and here the blood capillary. This is the blood capillary. Suppose this one is the blood capillary. The partial pressure of the oxygen, it is near about 95 to 97% in alveoli. 95 to 97%. Partial pressure of oxygen is 95 to 97% in alveoli, and here, and due to that, the oxygen enters into the blood capillary. This oxygen enters into the blood capillary. As soon as oxygen enters into the blood capillary, in the blood, the hemoglobin which is present in the RBC, it is present, hemoglobin is present in the RBC, and these RBCs are, or the hemoglobin, it is a oxygen carrier. This oxygen, it combines with hemoglobin. It is 4 oxygen molecules combines with hemoglobin molecule. One hemoglobin molecule contains 4 Fe++ ions. That's why the 4 oxygen combines with single hemoglobin molecule to produce oxyhemoglobin. Oxyhemoglobin. Why here that oxygen combines with that oxyhemoglobin? Because here the partial pressure of the oxygen is larger. It is more than that of a capillary. That's why here it combines with that hemoglobin molecule. Then it enters into. Then this oxygen, it carries towards the tissue. It runs all over the capillary. Through that capillary, it runs here and there. Then this oxyhemoglobin, when it reaches towards the tissue, any type of the cell, or where it is present, it reaches toward that cell. This oxyhemoglobin, this is the oxyhemoglobin. This oxyhemoglobin, it dissociates into hemoglobin. It dissociates into hemoglobin and oxygen. Why it dissociates into the hemoglobin and the oxygen? Whenever as soon as it reaches toward the cell, it reaches toward the cell, because here the partial pressure of the oxygen is the low in case of the tissue. Partial pressure of the oxygen is low in case of that tissue, and it is near about 50%. That is near about the 34 mmHg. So remember that when partial pressure of oxygen is larger, then and then only oxygen combines with the hemoglobin molecule and produce a oxyhemoglobin. But when such capillary reaches towards that cell, then the cell, whenever the cell contains the partial pressure of the oxygen is below than that of a 50%, then this hemoglobin molecule, or sorry, oxyhemoglobin molecule, it gets dissociates and produce hemoglobin and oxygen. Then this oxygen, it enters into the cell, it enters into the tissue. So this is the first step, how that oxygen it carries with the help of that hemoglobin molecule, by formation of oxyhemoglobin molecule. It enters into that cell. Why it dissociates? Because the partial pressure of that oxygen is the less in the cell, and it is also called as the Bohr's effect. The change in the curve due to the and the hemoglobin molecule dissociates into Hb and O2, or oxyhemoglobin molecule dissociate into the Hb and O2. This effect is called the 4 effect. Then here that oxygen, it enters into the cell. It combines with, you know that the cell contains, cell having a number of molecules, number of carbohydrate molecules are present, or the food material which is present in that, it is in the form of a carbohydrate, that is C6H12O6. When it combines, this dissociated oxygen combines with that carbohydrate, and here the oxidation of, due to the oxidation of carbohydrates, the H2O molecule and the CO2 molecules, they get free, or here it produces the H2O and CO2 plus, as well as the energy is produced, and energy is stored in the form of ATP in the mitochondria. So the cellular respiration takes place in the mitochondria. When oxygen combines with the carbohydrate, that is the oxidation of carbohydrate to produce the energy, and the byproducts are the CO2 and H2O. The H2O is useful for our body, but the CO2, it is a dangerous. It is not useful to our body. As soon as it is released, it has to eliminate from the body. It has to eliminate from the respiratory system with the help of that respiratory system. So this CO2, it has to eliminate, and to eliminate that, here this CO2, the released CO2, it is transferred, or it carries towards the alveoli. It carries towards the lungs. You know that the lungs having the alveoli. Lungs are made up of the alveoli. And through that lungs, from that lungs, it transported toward the trachea, towards the nostrils, and then it is eliminated. How it is eliminated? Here the CO2, which is produced by the oxidation of the food material, we need the energy for the survivalness. So the energy is produced, here the energy is produced in the form of ATP in the mitochondria, but the byproduct which is produced is the CO2, and it is dangerous to our body, so it has to eliminate. So the CO2 which is eliminated, CO2 which is produced during that respiration, during that mitochondrial cellular respiration, or the mitochondrial in mitochondria, the 7% this CO2, it is transferred by 3 ways. It is transferred by 3 ways. First way is by plasma. That is 7% of the CO2 is transferred through the plasma. It dissolves in the plasma and it is transferred toward the alveoli. Then second way is 70% carbon dioxide. 70% carbon dioxide, it is transported by bicarbonate ions. By bicarbonate ions. And third way is 23% CO2 is transported by RBCs. Remember that? The CO2 is transferred towards the lungs by 3 ways. Which are these 3 ways? First is the 70% through the plasma, by plasma, 70% by bicarbonate ions, and 23% by RBCs. As like this, here the CO2 is transported towards the alveoli. How it is transported? Look at here. The 7% CO2 is transported, the CO2. Out of that, the total amount of the CO2 which is produced during the oxidation of that food material, during this respiration, the 7% of the CO2, it dissolves in H2O of plasma, and it is transported towards the lungs. It is transported towards the lungs. That is by plasma. Then 70% of CO2, it is transported by bicarbonate ions. How it is transported? Look at here. This CO2 enters into the plasma and then it combines with hemoglobin molecule. It combines with the hemoglobin which is present in the RBC. So this CO2, it enters into the RBC and it combines with H2O molecules. Combines with H2O. CO2 combines with H2O to produce carbonic acids, H2CO3. Carbonic acid. This carbonic acid, it is produced by Zn containing carbonic acid reducers. Okay. So this CO2 plus H2O produces H2CO3. H2CO3. And again, it is unstable. That's why it produces, with the help of that, again Zn containing carbonic acid reduced with the help of carbonic acid enzyme. It produces again H plus ions and HCO3. H plus ions and HCO3. Look at here. So with the help of Zn containing carbonic acids enzymes, it produces the H2CO3 and here the HCO3. Here the H plus ions, as the H plus ions are increased, here the ionic balance, it get imbalanced, or there is a imbalancing of ions, and that's why here the Cl minus ions, it enters into the RBC. To maintain the balance, the Cl minus ions from that plasma enters into the RBC, and it is called as chloride shift. It is called as chloride shift, or it is also called as Hamburg effect. It is called as the Hamburg effect. It is also called as the Hamburg effect. Okay. So what is the chloride shift? Why the chloride ions enters into the RBC? Because the H plus ions are produced, and due to the H plus ions, more amount of, or the increasing the H plus ions, the ionic balance, it get imbalanced, and that's why the Cl minus ions enter into the RBCs. This is called the chloride shift. Then this H plus ions also, the increasing H plus ions, it combines with this H plus ions, it combines with the hemoglobin molecule to produce reduced hemoglobin or deoxidized hemoglobin. That is the increased H plus ions, whenever it combines with the hemoglobin molecule, then it is produced, it produces the reduced hemoglobin or the deoxidized hemoglobin molecule. Okay, as like this, then this HCO3, it combines with, then it enters into the plasma. The carbonic acid, it enters into the plasma, and this HCO3, it combines with Na plus ions or the K plus ions to produce the sodium bicarbonate or potassium bicarbonate. Sodium bicarbonate or the potassium bicarbonates are produced. Okay. Then, when it reaches towards the alveoli, the partial pressure of the CO2 is the less in alveoli. That's why this Na plus sodium bicarbonate or the potassium bicarbonate, it get dissociates and produce Na plus ions. Then it produce Na plus ions plus sodium bicarbonate, that is HCO3, and this HCO3 again it converted into H2O plus CO2, and this CO2 it enters into the alveoli. Okay, as like this, here by sodium, by bicarbonate, through the bicarbonate or by the process of bicarbonate, 70% of the CO2 it enters into the alveoli. Then the third way is 23% of RBCs or 23% of the CO2 it is transported by RBCs. How it is transported by RBCs? Here this RBC it combines, this CO2 it combines with the RBC and produce carb-amino-hemoglobin molecule, which produces carb-amino-hemoglobin molecule. Carb-amino-hemoglobin molecule is produced as like this three way, and then it is transported towards the alveoli. As soon as it reaches toward the alveoli, this carb-amino-hemoglobin molecule it get dissociates, and then here the CO2 it releases into the lungs. As like this, the CO2 it is transported towards the alveoli. The first way is by plasma, that is the CO2 it enters into the plasma, it combines with the water present in the plasma, and then it goes towards the plasma, goes toward the alveoli. Then second way is 70% of the CO2 transported by bicarbonate ions, that is the CO2 which is released by the oxidation process. The CO2 it enters into the capillary, it enters into the plasma, but this CO2 when it enters into through that plasma, when it enters into the RBCs, in RBC CO2 combines with the water molecule of the red blood cells, hemoglobin molecule, and produces the carbonic acid with the help of Zn containing carbonic acid enzyme. It is not stable, it is unstable. That's why it produces the H plus ions as well as the HCO3. Here the H plus, whenever the H plus ions are increased, the blood pH of the blood as well as the ionic balance it get imbalanced, it get disturbed, and to maintain this ionic balance, the Cl minus ions from the plasma it enters into the RBC. This is called the chloride shift, or it is also called the Hamburg effect. Then this HCO3 combines with the Na plus ions or the K plus ions or the potassium to produce sodium bicarbonate or the potassium bicarbonate. Then it runs along with or through that capillary. As soon as it reaches towards the cell, due to the cell having a partial pressure of the CO2 is lower, partial pressure of the CO2 in alveoli is lower. That's why here it enters into the alveoli. We have seen that near about 40% CO2 concentration is present in alveoli, and near about the 45% of the CO2 concentration is present in the blood capillary. That's why here this CO2 it diffuses into the alveoli. This is the second way. And third way, here the RBC, with the help of that RBC, the CO2 released it enters into the RBCs and to produce carb-amino-hemoglobin. As soon as it reaches toward the alveoli, it gets dissociates and produce again CO2 and hemoglobin. Then this CO2 it diffuses into the alveoli. So with the help of that three steps, or with the help of that three way, the CO2 is transferred towards the alveoli, and the hemoglobin is transferred from alveoli to tissue or toward the cell. Look at in Marathi. ही अल्व्हिओलर सेल आहे, अल्व्हिओलाई आहे, आणि ही टिश्यू सेल, हा टिश्यू सेल आहे. लंग्स मध्ये आलेली जी एअर आहे त्या एअर मधून आपण एक्सटर्नल रेस्पिरेशन मध्ये बघितलेलं आहे की O2 चं कॉन्सन्ट्रेशन आहे अल्व्हिओलाई मध्ये जास्त असतं आणि ते ब्लड कॅपिलरी मध्ये कमी असतं, त्यामुळे तो डिफ्यूज केला जातो. पण हा हिमोग्लोबिन बरोबर कधी रिॲक्ट होतो, कधी कंबाईन होतो, जेव्हा पार्शल प्रेशर आहे, जेव्हा म्हणजे ज्या ठिकाणी जेव्हा ब्लड कॅपिलरी ज्या एखाद्या ऑर्गनला किंवा ज्या अल्व्हिओलायला टच होते आणि त्या ठिकाणचं जर पार्शल प्रेशर, ऑक्सिजनचं पार्शल प्रेशर हे 95 to 97% असेल, त्यावेळेस हा ऑक्सिजन हा हिमोग्लोबिन मॉलिक्यूलला कंबाईन होतो and then produces the oxyhemoglobin molecule. आता इथं 4 O2 का, तर या ठिकाणी 1 hemoglobin molecule contain the 4 Fe++ ions. एका हिमोग्लोबिन मॉलिक्यूल मध्ये 4 Fe++ आयन्स असतात, त्यामुळे तिथं 4 O2 कंबाईन केले जातात अँड प्रोड्यूस अ ऑक्सीहिमोग्लोबिन मॉलिक्यूल. हा ऑक्सीहिमोग्लोबिन मॉलिक्यूल हा ऑक्सिजन आहे हा कॅरी करतो. ज्या ठिकाणी टिश्यू आहे, ज्या ठिकाणी सेल आहे, त्या ठिकाणी तो ज्यावेळेस तो तिथं पोहोचतो त्यावेळेस हा डिसोसिएट होतो, स्प्लिट अप होतो. म्हणजे ऑक्सीहिमोग्लोबिन मॉलिक्यूल इट गेट स्प्लिट अप. तो तिथं डिसोसिएट का होतो, तर या ठिकाणी या रिजन मध्ये पार्शल प्रेशर ऑफ ऑक्सिजन इज द लेस, इथं कमी असतो, त्यामुळे तो डिसोसिएट होतो. इथं अल्व्हिओलायच्या ठिकाणी पार्शल प्रेशर ऑफ ऑक्सिजन इज द हायर, दॅट इज नियर अबाउट 95 to 97%, त्यामुळे तिथं तो कंबाईन होतो. इथं तो का डिसोसिएट होतो, तर या ठिकाणी तो तिथं पार्शल प्रेशर ऑफ ऑक्सिजन इज लेस, दॅट इज नियर अबाउट 34% किंवा या ठिकाणी 34 mmHg किंवा आपण याला 50% असं म्हणतोय. मग या रिजन मध्ये तो ऑक्सीहिमोग्लोबिन इट गेट डिसोसिएट इनटू Hb अँड 4O2. हा Hb मॉलिक्यूल या टिश्यू मध्ये जात नाही. हा Hb मॉलिक्यूल पुन्हा या ऑक्सिजनला माघारी घेऊन याला इकडे जातो, अल्व्हिओलायकडे जातो किंवा ब्लड मध्ये तसाच फिरतो आणि हा ऑक्सिजन आहे इट रिलीजेस इनटू द सेल, हा सेल मध्ये रिलीज केला जातो. इथं काय होतं, O2 हा सेल मध्ये येतो, सेलमध्ये प्रोटीन्स कार्बोहायड्रेट सगळे असतात. मग या ठिकाणी या कार्बोहायड्रेटचं ऑक्सिडेशन होतं. कार्बोहायड्रेट इज इन द फॉर्म ऑफ C6H12O6. इट कंबाइन्स विथ दॅट ऑक्सिजन, यालाच आपण ऑक्सिडेशन ऑफ कार्बोहायड्रेट्स म्हणतो. ऑक्सिडेशन ऑफ कार्बोहायड्रेट झाल्यामुळे या ठिकाणी एनर्जी तयार होते. इट टेक्स प्लेस इन द मायटोकॉन्ड्रिया. एनर्जी आहे ही एटीपीच्या स्वरूपामध्ये मायटोकॉन्ड्रियामध्ये साठवून ठेवली जाते आणि बाय प्रोडक्ट काय तयार होतात, तर CO2 आणि H2O तयार होतात. यातलं H2 आहे आपल्याला आवश्यक आहे, पण CO2 हा डेंजरस आहे. ॲज सून ॲट इट प्रोड्युसेस, जसा तो तयार होतो तसा त्याला लगेच बाहेर फेकून द्यावा लागतो. आणि हा कसा फेकून दिला जातो, तर 3 प्रकारे फेकून दिला जातो. कोणते 3 प्रकारे, तर एक प्लाझ्माच्या माध्यमातून, दुसरा बायकार्बोनेट आयन्सच्या माध्यमातून आणि तिसरा म्हणजे आरबीसीच्या माध्यमातून. प्लाझ्माच्या माध्यमातून 70% रिलीज केला जातो, ट्रान्सपोर्ट केला जातो. बायकार्बोनेटच्या आयन्सच्या माध्यमातून 70% ट्रान्सपोर्ट केला जातो आणि आरबीसीच्या माध्यमातून 23% ट्रान्सपोर्ट केला जातो. प्लाझ्मामधून कसा ट्रान्सपोर्ट केला जातो, तर CO2 आणि प्लाझ्मामध्ये असलेला H2O कंबाईन होऊन कार्बोनिक ऍसिड तयार होतं आणि हे कार्बोनिक ऍसिड इथं या अल्व्हिओलायपर्यंत आणलं जातं. अल्व्हिओलायमध्ये पुन्हा इथं ते स्प्लिट अप होतं, म्हणजे CO2 आणि H2O इथं पुन्हा स्प्लिट अप होतो आणि CO2 रिलीज केला जातो. बायकार्बोनेट ऍसिड आयन्सच्या सहाय्यानं कसा ट्रान्सपोर्ट केला जातो, तर CO2 हा प्लाझ्मामध्ये येऊन तो पुन्हा आरबीसी मध्ये येतो. आरबीसी मध्ये असणाऱ्या H2O बरोबर किंवा या ठिकाणी हिमोग्लोबिन मध्ये असणाऱ्या H2O बरोबर तो कंबाईन होतो आणि त्याच्यापासून कार्बोनिक ऍसिड्स तयार होत असतो, H2CO3. त्याच्यासाठी लागणारा झेडेन कंटेनिंग एन्झाइम्स जे आहेत, ह्या झेडेन कंटेनिंग एन्झाइमच्या सहाय्याने हे तयार होतं. हा अनस्टेबल आहे आणि अनस्टेबल असल्यामुळे H+ आयन्स तयार होतात आणि HCO3 तयार होतात. हे H+ आयन्स जर जास्ती प्रमाणामध्ये झालंय तर ब्लडचा आयोनिक बॅलन्स हा ढासळतो आणि तो आयोनिक बॅलन्स साधण्यासाठी मग या ठिकाणी Cl- आहेत हे पुन्हा आरबीसी मध्ये किंवा हिमोग्लोबिन मध्ये ट्रान्सफर केले जातात. त्याला आपण क्लोराईड शिफ्ट असं म्हणतो किंवा हॅम्बर्ग इफेक्ट असं म्हणतो. म्हणजे क्लोराईड शिफ्ट का होतात, तर H+ आयन्स हे इन्क्रीज होतात. कशामुळे इन्क्रीज झालेले असतात, तर कार्बोनिक ऍसिड इट इज नॉट स्टेबल. इट कॅन बी कन्व्हर्टेड इनटू दी H+ आयन्स अँड दी HCO3. मग हे H+ आयन्स इन्क्रीज झाल्यामुळं त्याचा बॅलन्स साधण्यासाठी क्लोराईड आयन्स हे शिफ्ट होतात, त्याला आपण क्लोराईड शिफ्ट असं म्हणतो. तिसरी पद्धत म्हणजे आता आणखीन काय होतं तर हे HCO3 कंबाईन्स होत हे पुन्हा प्लाझ्मा मध्ये येतात, आरबीसी मधून पुन्हा किंवा हिमोग्लोबिन मधून पुन्हा आरबीसी प्लाझ्मा मध्ये येतात. प्लाझ्मा मध्ये असणारे Na+ आयन्स आणि K+ आयन्स याच्या बरोबर कंबाईन होऊन सोडियम बायकार्बोनेट आणि पोटॅशियम बायकार्बोनेट तयार होतात. म्हणजे CO2 हा सोडियम बायकार्बोनेट पोटॅशियम बायकार्बोनेटच्या माध्यमातून या ठिकाणी इथं आणला जातो. म्हणजे थोडक्यात CO2 सोडियम बायकार्बोनेट कोणाबरोबर मैत्री करतो, Na+ बरोबर करतो, K+ बरोबर मैत्री करतो आणि तो इथपर्यंत येतो. इथं आल्यानंतर काय होतंय, पुन्हा इथं कार्बोनिक ऍसिडचं पार्शल प्रेशर ऑफ द कार्बन डायऑक्साइड इज लोअर, इथं लोअर असतं आणि त्यामुळं पुन्हा हा डिसोसिएट होतो. कोण डिसोसिएट होतं, सोडियम बायकार्बोनेट आणि पोटॅशियम बायकार्बोनेट डिसोसिएट होतो आणि इथं पुन्हा Na+ आयन्स HCO3 आणि H2O, CO2 प्लस H2O हे या ठिकाणी HCO3 पासून H2O आणि CO2 होतात. CO2 इथं रिलीज केला जातो. तिसरी पद्धत म्हणजे आरबीसीच्या माध्यमातून CO2 आरबीसी ला कंबाईन होऊन कार्ब अमायनो हिमोग्लोबिन तयार होतो आणि हा इथपर्यंत आणला जाऊन पुन्हा इथं हा डिसोसिएट होतो. As like this CO2 it transfer toward the alveoli, that is from lungs the O2 transferred towards the cell, each and every cell with the help of hemoglobin, that is with the help of oxyhemoglobin. Oxyhemoglobin, hemoglobin is the oxygen carrier. It has great affinity towards the oxygen. As soon as it reaches, it enters into the blood capillary, hemoglobin combines with that oxygen. ऑक्सिजन बरोबर लगेच मैत्री करतो. पण जेव्हा त्याचं प्रेशर कमी असतं तेव्हा त्यांची मैत्री तुटते. इथं ऑक्सिजन एंटर्स इनटू द सेल, hemoglobin again goes towards the, or it in that stream, it run in a stream of that blood, and here also the CO2 it transported towards the alveoli. As like this, here we have seen the internal respiration and the cellular respiration. Cellular respiration takes place in the mitochondria, that is the synthesis of ATP molecules, and here the internal respiration, that is formation of hemoglobin molecule. There are two steps: formation of hemoglobin molecule, then dissociation of hemoglobin molecule. Here formation of sodium bicarbonate ions, dissociation of sodium bicarbonate, formation of carbonic acid, dissociation of carbonic acid, formation of carb amino hemoglobin, dissociation of carb amino hemoglobin molecule. म्हणजे तयार होणं पुन्हा सेपरेट होणं, इथं तयार होतात पुन्हा सेपरेट होतात. As like this, O2 and CO2 is transferred.